It was the most important day of her life, but Sofia Mendoza had no idea it would turn into the most humiliating. During the wedding reception at the Vasquez farmhouse, her husband Diego's family treated her like a commoner who had seduced their son for money. Mother-in-law Carmen whispered to the guests that she was just a lucky secretary. Her father-in-law Rafael completely ignored her, and her brothers-in-law made cruel comments about how she wouldn't last a year. What they didn't know was that Sofia Mendoza wasn't her real name. In reality, she was Sofia Herrera, the secret heiress to one of Spain's largest industrial empires, who had renounced her last name to find true love. But when Diego himself began treating her with contempt in front of her family, Sofia picked up the phone and with a single call canceled the $950 million business deal that would have saved the Vasquez family business from bankruptcy. Sometimes it takes the perfect revenge to teach people the true value of respect. The farmhouse Los Olivos shone in the September sun, with its perfectly manicured gardens and Andalusian facade overlooking the Sevillian hills. It was the place the Vasquez family had chosen to celebrate the wedding of their son Diego, heir to the construction company that had built palaces and infrastructure throughout Spain for 3 generations. Sofia looked at herself in the bridal suite mirror, adjusting for the last time the French lace dress she had carefully chosen. At 26, she was beautiful, with long brown hair tied back in an elegant updo and green eyes that shone with intelligence. But above all, she was deeply in love with Diego, the man she had married 2 hours earlier in the chapel of the farmhouse. They had met 80 months earlier in a cafe in Madrid when he had accidentally spilled coffee on her bag. Diego was charming at 32 years old and had the air of a successful man who ran the family business. She had introduced herself simply as Sofia Mendoza, a secretary at a law firm. He had never revealed his true identity. In reality, she was Sofia Herrera, the only daughter of Aurelio Herrera, owner of Herrera Industries, a giant valued at more than 3 billion euros. At 18, Sofia had made a drastic decision. Tired of being courted only for her heritage, she had abandoned her father's surname and begun living under a false identity. I actually worked as a secretary. He rented a modest apartment in Malesana and led a normal life. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not for what she had. Diego had seemed like the perfect man, kind, attentive, seemingly uninterested in money. During their courtship, he had insisted on always paying for dinners and trips, saying it was his duty as a gentleman. Sofia had been moved by this chivalry, unaware that Diego was actually bankrupt and that his family was hiding a devastating financial crisis. The reception began in the main hall of the farmhouse, with 200 elegantly dressed guests toasting the bride and groom. But Sofia immediately began to notice disturbing signs. Diego's relatives greeted her with polite coldness. Her friends ignored her, and even the waitresses seemed to treat her with haughtiness. Carmen Vasquez, the old mother-in-law, was the worst of all with her ostentatious jewelry and haughty attitude. He never missed an opportunity to make Sofia feel inadequate. During the toast, while Sofia smiled next to her husband, Carmen approached a group of high society ladies. The mother-in-law spoke loud enough for Sofia to hear, describing her new daughter-in-law as a girl of humble origins who had attracted Diego with her beauty. She explained to the guests that she came from a normal family, worked as a secretary, and had probably seen marriage as an opportunity to change her life. Rafael Vasquez, the 70-something father-in-law, was more subtle, but equally cruel. During dinner, he never spoke to her directly. He spoke about her in the third person, even when he was sitting at the table. And when someone asked him about his daughter-in-law, he responded with vague and unenthusiastic phrases. The brothers-in-law were the worst. Alejandro, 35, Diego's older brother, made cruel comments about class differences, suggesting that Sofia would never adapt to his lifestyle. Carlos, the youngest at 28, was even more direct, making sarcastic comments about her cheap clothes and limited education. But the most painful moment came when Diego himself began to change his attitude, perhaps influenced by his family, perhaps embarrassed by her criticism, and he began to treat Sofia coldly. During dinner, he avoided holding her hand. She didn't stand up for her when her brothers-in-law made jokes, and even laughed when Carmen told a humiliating anecdote about Sophia's parents, whom she had only known superficially. Sophia felt her heart breaking piece by piece. She had given up her identity to find true love, but she was discovering that the man she had married was cowardly and shallow, like all the others she had tried to avoid. The final blow came during the cake cutting. While posing for photos, Carmen approached Sophia and, with a fake smile for the photographers, whispered something in her ear that made her blood run cold. He told her that she should be grateful to have entered such an important family, that she should behave well and not cause embarrassment, and that if she were sensible she could have a comfortable life. At that moment, Sophia understood that marriage had been a terrible mistake. Not only had she married the wrong man, but she had also fallen into a family of mean and arrogant people who considered her inferior. But what the Vasquezes didn't know was that they were about to make the most costly mistake of their lives, because Sofia Herrera was used to being underestimated and had long since learned that the best revenge is the one that comes when no one expects it. As the guests continued to celebrate unknowingly, Sophia apologized, saying she had to go over some details with the wedding planner. In fact, he headed toward the farmhouse library, looking for a quiet place to gather his thoughts and decide how to react to the humiliation he had suffered. Sitting among the shelves of old books, Sophia reviewed her life. The decision to abandon the Herrera identity had not been easy. Her father, Aurelio, had raised her after her mother's premature death, teaching her everything about business and preparing her to run the family empire. Herrera Industries controlled strategic sectors: steel, renewable energy, shipbuilding, and, above all, it had a real estate division that built skyscrapers throughout Europe. At 18, however, Sophia had lived through a traumatic experience. Her boyfriend at the time, who she believed truly loved her, had accidentally discovered her true identity. From that moment on, he had become completely different, interested only in money, social position, and the advantages he could obtain. When Sophia left him, he had threatened to sell the story to the tabloids. Since then, Sophia had decided to live in anonymity. She had convinced her father to let her experience normal life, promising that one day she would return home to take over his role. Aurelio, initially opposed, had accepted, seeing how determined she was. He had given her a modest income to survive on, but had also made her promise to call him if she was in trouble. For the next 8 years, Sophia had lived like an ordinary person. I had studied law, worked in law firms, rented small apartments, and shopped in cheap supermarkets. She had been happy like that until she met Diego and believed she had found true love. Now, sitting in that library, while her in-laws scorned her in the next room, Sophia realized how naive she had been. Diego was no different from the others. Perhaps it was worse, because he didn't even have the courage to defend the woman he had just married. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. When Aurelio Herrera responded, his voice immediately expressed concern. He knew his daughter only called him in an emergency, and the tone of her voice told him something was wrong. Sophia told him everything in a few minutes: the wedding, the humiliation, the discovery of Diego and his family's true nature. Aurelio listened in silence, and when she had finished, his response was dry and determined. He told her that he had always known that sooner or later something like this would happen. It hurt him that she had to suffer, but he was also proud that his daughter had finally understood that she couldn't run away from her nature forever. She was a blacksmith, and blacksmiths did not let themselves be humiliated by anyone. Then Aurelio told her something that surprised her. In recent months, he had been researching basketball, intrigued by his daughter's wedding. He had discovered that the family business was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had debts of more than 200 million euros, several projects were blocked, and they were desperately looking for a financial partner to save themselves. The most interesting thing was that for 3 months they had been negotiating a contract with Herrera Industries for the construction of a luxury residential complex, a $950 million project that would have saved the Basques from bankruptcy. The contract was practically closed, only the final signature was missing. Sophia felt something cold and determined grow inside her. He asked his father if he still had time to stop the deal. Aurelio laughed on the phone, explaining that as president of the company, he had the power to cancel any contract until the final signature, and that signature was scheduled for the following Monday. Sophia looked at her watch. It was Sunday night. She had less than 24 hours to decide whether to financially destroy the family that had just humiliated her on her wedding day. He returned to the reception, observing the Vasquez family with different eyes. Carmen, who continued to speak badly of her with her friends. Rafael, who systematically ignored her, Alejandro and Carlos, who made jokes about her poverty, and Diego, her husband, who hadn't lifted a finger to defend her. He looked at them all as they toasted and laughed, unaware that their financial salvation depended on the woman they were scorning. It was ironic. They were treating the only person in the world who could save them from bankruptcy like a porosra. Sophia smiled for the first time all night. He had finally understood what to do, but first he had to test Diego one last time. If her husband had shown even a modicum of courage in defending her, perhaps things could have gone differently. But if he continued to behave like a coward, then the Basques would learn the hard way what it meant to underestimate a blacksmith. Sophia decided to give Diego one last chance. During the bride and groom's dance, she dragged him to the terrace overlooking the illuminated gardens, telling him they needed to talk. Under the starry Andalusian sky, Sophia opened her heart to the man she had married just hours before. She explained how humiliated she had felt by her family's behavior and how hurt she was that he had never stood up for her. Diego listened to her with an increasingly irritated expression. His response was devastating. She told him he was exaggerating, that his family was elegant and sophisticated, and that she felt uncomfortable because he actually came from a different background. She added that she should be grateful to have entered such a prestigious family instead of complaining. Sophia felt something die inside her. It wasn't just disappointment, it was the definitive death of love for that man. Upon returning to the living room, Carmen continued her venomous comments. In front of her friends, she told how Diego had fished well with such a grateful wife. Alejandro added that he was curious to see how long the marriage would last, while Carlos laughed, saying that perhaps it would have been better if Diego had found himself a more suitable wife. Sophia listened to everything from the head table with Diego at her side, who didn't react. At that moment he made the final decision, stood up elegantly, and headed towards the library. He called his father Aurelio and told him to immediately cancel the $950 million deal with the Vasquez family. He then asked for a press conference to be called for the following day. It was time to reveal who Sofia Herrera really was. He returned to the reception with a serene smile that no one could decipher. For the rest of the night, she behaved like the perfect girlfriend, knowing that in 24 hours the Vasquez family's lives would have changed forever. On Monday morning, Sophia woke up at 6, leaving Diego, who was still fast asleep after the festivities. He dressed carefully, choosing an elegant but understated suit, and prepared for what would be one of the most important days of his life. Before leaving the hotel where they had spent their first wedding night, she left a note on Diego's bedside table. He wrote to her that he had some urgent matters to attend to and that they would meet later. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. He didn't specify anything else. The press conference was held in the auditorium of the Herrera skyscraper in central Madrid, attended by journalists from Spain's leading financial media outlets. Aurelio Herrera, 72 years old, but still imposing and charismatic, introduced his daughter as the new general manager of the family business. The news immediately caused a sensation. No one knew of the existence of a blacksmith heiress. Aurelio explained to reporters that Sophia had spent the last 8 years incognito to gain experience in the real world, far from the privileges of wealth. She was now ready to take over the leadership of the industrial empire valued at more than $3 billion. Sophia's photos immediately appeared on news websites and social media. The newspaper headlines were sensational. The secret heiress, the blacksmith no one knew, 8 years among the common people. Diego woke up around 10 and found his wife's note. Initially, she wasn't too worried, thinking he had gone to sort out some wedding-related paperwork, But when she turned on her phone and saw dozens of messages and missed calls, she realized something serious was happening. The first message he read was from his brother Alejandro. "Have you seen the news? Your wife is a multi-millionaire heiress." Links to newspaper articles followed, which Diego opened with growing disbelief. In the photos, I saw Sofia, his wife, sitting next to Aurelio Herrera during the press conference. The woman he had married, believing her to be a simple secretary, was actually one of the richest people in Spain. Diego felt like his world was collapsing. He called Sofia, but the phone was off. He called his parents' house, and his mother, Carmen, answered with a strange voice, somewhere between excited and terrified. Carmen had also seen the news and couldn't process it. The girl they had treated like an upstart was actually one of the most powerful women in Spain. He was beginning to realize the seriousness of what they had done, but he still hoped there would be no consequences. Diego immediately returned to Madrid and went to the offices of Herrera Industries. Security made him wait at reception for hours before allowing him to go up to Sofia's office on the 50th floor of the skyscraper. When he finally found her, he was shocked by the change. Sofia was wearing a tailored suit. She had an assistant who took notes, and above all she had an air of natural authority that Diego had never seen before. She was still beautiful, but now she seemed to belong to a completely different world than his. Diego tried to apologize by stammering out confusing explanations about his family's behavior and that he didn't know who she really was. But Sofia stopped him with a gesture of her hand. He explained in a calm but cold voice that he had decided to live anonymously precisely to avoid people interested only in his money. She had believed that he was different, that he loved her for who she was. Instead, he had discovered that he was weak, shallow, and incapable of defending the woman he had married. Sofia informed him that she had canceled the $950 million trade agreement that would have saved the Vasquez company. He had also initiated the process of annulling the marriage. Diego could keep the truth. He had lost the love and future of the richest woman in Spain out of cowardice. That night, Diego returned to his parents to tell them what had happened. The Vasquez family gathered in the living room, realizing for the first time the magnitude of the disaster they had caused. Not only had they lost the business of the century, but they had made enemies of the most powerful woman they had ever met. Carmen cried, realizing she had insulted and humiliated a person who could completely destroy her life with a single call. Rafael paced back and forth, calculating debts and the timing of bankruptcy. Alexander and Charles remained silent, finally understanding that their arrogance had costs they could not afford, but the worst was yet to come. In the days following the press conference, Sofia began to implement a strategy of revenge as refined as it was ruthless. He did not limit himself to canceling the agreement with the Vasquez family, but began to use the full power of the Herrera name to close off any escape routes. The first step was to contact all the banks that had granted loans to the Vasquez company. Herrera Industries had privileged relationships with all the major Spanish credit institutions, and a simple call from Aurelio was enough to force a re-examination of all financing contracts. Within a week, 3 banks called in their loans, accelerating the basketball players' liquidity crisis. The second move was even more subtle. Sofia quietly let the construction industry know that the Vasquez family was experiencing serious financial problems. In the business world, reputation is everything, and when talk of financial hardship starts, suppliers and customers immediately flee. In 2 weeks, the Vasquez family lost 4 major contracts, and several long-standing suppliers began demanding advance payments. The Vasquez family's situation quickly became dramatic. Rafael, who had managed the company with a firm hand all his life, began to experience health problems due to stress. Carmen fell into depression, realizing that her arrogance had destroyed the work of 3 generations. It was then that Sofia played her cruelest card. Through her lawyers, she let the Vasquez family know that she was willing to acquire their company to avoid bankruptcy. The offer was 50 million euros, a sum that barely covered the most pressing debts, but which would have allowed the family to avoid bankruptcy. It was a humiliating offer, The Vasquez Company, which in better times was worth more than $200 million, was being sold off for a fraction of its value, but it was also the only way out available. The signing took place at the same notary's office where Diego and Sofia had signed their marriage contract just 2 weeks earlier. Irony of fate. The marriage had already been annulled by the ecclesiastical court, but the memory of that day made the situation even more bitter. Sofia showed up at the appointment accompanied by her lawyers and Father Aurelio. She wore a black suit that made her look even more stern and powerful. The Vasquez family arrived as a defeated family. Rafael had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Carmen's eyes were red with tears. Diego looked like a ghost. During the signing of the documents, Sofia did not utter a single word of greeting. He signed the papers with the coldness of a banker closing a deal, without ever looking his ex-in-laws in the face. When it was all over, Rafael tried one last resort. He got up from his chair and walked straight to Sofia, asking her to have mercy on a family that had erred out of stupidity, not malice. Sofia looked at him for the first time during the entire meeting. His green eyes were as cold as ice as he replied that they had had the opportunity to treat her with respect on their wedding day. They had chosen to humiliate her in front of 200 people, demonstrating their true nature. Now they were simply reaping what they had sown. Leaving the notary's office, Sofia felt strangely empty. The revenge was complete. The Basques had been punished for their arrogance, but the expected satisfaction did not come. He had destroyed a family, but he had not recovered the lost love, nor erased the humiliation suffered. That night, alone in her Madrid penthouse, Sofia realized she had won the battle, but lost something important: the ability to trust and love. The Vasquezes had paid for their stupidity, but she had paid a different, perhaps higher, price. However, when she thought back on the humiliation she had suffered on her wedding day, she knew she had done the right thing. Sometimes in life, you have to teach people that every action has consequences, and that underestimating someone can be very costly. 2 years after the annulled wedding, Sofia Herrera had become one of the most powerful women in Spain. At the helm of Herrera Industries, he had expanded the company into new sectors, closed multi-billion-euro international deals, and earned the respect of the entire business community. The newspapers described her as the new queen of Spanish industry, a woman of iron who had inherited her father's business genius. The former Vasquez company had been completely restructured and renamed Herrera Construction. Rafael Vasquez worked as an external consultant, a humiliating role for someone who had run the company for 30 years. Carmen had had to sell all her jewelry and move to a modest apartment. Alejandro had found work as an employee in a small construction company. Carlos had emigrated to Germany to seek his fortune. Far from the ruined family name, Diego had completely disappeared from the social chronicles. Some said he worked as a financial consultant, others that he had moved abroad. Sofia hadn't heard from him again, and truth be told, she wasn't interested in hearing from him, but professional success hadn't filled the emotional void that had formed inside her. At 28, Sofia was extremely rich and powerful, but also deeply alone. The men who approached her clearly did so out of self-interest, and she had lost the ability to trust anyone. The lesson learned from her marriage to Diego had been brutal, but effective. Selfless love does not exist when you are rich. Every smile hides a calculation. Every declaration of affection has a price. Every relationship is a business transaction disguised as a feeling. He had transformed the family palace into a fortress surrounded by bodyguards, assistants, consultants, but no true friends. His days were marked by meetings, press conferences, and business trips, but moments of genuine happiness were extremely rare. Aurelio, now 74, watched his daughter's progress with concern. He was proud of his business successes, but concerned about his private life. Sofia had become tougher, more distrustful, more ruthless in business. One night, during a private dinner at the family villa, Aurelio decided to address the issue directly. She told Sofia that she had built an economic empire, but had emotionally destroyed herself. Revenge against Diego and his family had been just, but now he was paying too high a price in terms of personal happiness. Sophia listened to her father in silence. Then he responded with the coldness he had learned in the last 2 years. He told her that he had simply accepted reality. When you have power and wealth, true love is impossible. Better to be alone and powerful than in love and vulnerable. But that night, alone in her attic, Sophia realized that maybe her father was right. He had destroyed the Vasquez family to avenge his trampled dignity. But in the process, she had also destroyed the best part of herself, the part capable of loving without calculation. She thought back on those 8 years she lived as Sophia Mendoza, when she worked as a secretary and dreamed of finding true love. He had been happier in that shabby apartment than he is now in his $20 million villa. The true price of his revenge had not been economic, but emotional. She had punished the Vasquezes for their arrogance and stupidity, but she had also punished herself by condemning herself to a life of gilded solitude. However, Sophia knew she couldn't go back. His face was too famous, his name too powerful to ever live in anonymity. She was trapped in the gilded cage she had built for herself. The last time she heard from Diego was through an article in a local newspaper. He had opened a small real estate agency in the provinces and had married a primary school teacher. They lived in a modest little house and were expecting their first child. In the photos, he looked serene, very different from the ambitious man she had married 2 years earlier. Sophia looked at those photos with contradictory feelings. On the one hand, there was satisfaction in seeing that Diego had lost everything he had worked for. On the other hand, there was a strange nostalgia for the simplicity of that normal life that she could never have again. He closed the newspaper and returned to his multi-billion euro contracts. She was Sofia Herrera, one of the most powerful women in Spain, feared by her enemies and respected by her allies. He had everything that money could buy and all the power a person could desire. But as she looked at the photo of her ex-husband happy with his new family, she realized that maybe, after all, she was the one who had lost the most in this whole story. She had won the war, but she had lost herself. And now that I had it all, I finally understood that the only thing that really mattered in life was the one thing I couldn't buy. The possibility of being loved for who you are, not for what you have. Like it. If you believe that respect cannot be bought, it must be earned. Comment on which moment in history had the greatest impact on you. Share to inspire those who believe that every action has consequences. Subscribe for more stories of power, revenge, and second chances. Sometimes underestimating someone can cost you everything you have. Sometimes the perfect revenge is the one no one sees coming. And sometimes winning means losing the only thing that really matters. Because true power isn't in the money you have, but in the respect you earn. Z.